With the popularity that Game of Thrones had, the subgenre of fantasy known as Grimdark has become quite popular as well. There's still some debate as to what exactly Grimdark is, but a vague and somewhat basic definition is that it has a tone, style, or setting that is particularly dystopian, amoral, or violent. Grimdark can be tricky then, as it's often difficult to find a balance for readers that's between exploring these elements with an interesting amount of depth without crossing the line of gratuitous or shocking simply for the sake of it. For those wanting to get more into the genre, here are 5 grimdark fantasy books you might be interested in checking out. Just a disclaimer, I'll only be touching on stories I personally have some familiarity with, so as to provide you with the most helpful information as possible. You are of course more than welcome to leave your own recommendations in the comments down below, and I'll also list some that I often see at the top of grimdark fantasy lists that I haven't read yet, but I think you might be interested in as well. Starting off the list is Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence. Lawrence's writing style I find to lean on the more formal side, similar to that of some classic fantasy. This makes for an interesting juxtaposition then with Jorg as our main character, whose general demeanor is quite despicable. This is certainly not a character that you'll root for, which is common in Grimdark, but rather you'll find yourself observing and discovering more about them as the story progresses. The rating for Prince of Thorns is slightly lower than some of its peers on this list, and my personal guess as to why is because our main character is so unlikable. The opening pages of the book show him raping and pillaging, which is a pretty difficult thing for most readers to get past, even if there's the possibility of there being plot twists or discoveries about the character along the way. Next up, we have the manga and anime Claymore. It takes place in a world where monsters exist, and female monster hunters known as Claymores defend mankind against them. Claymores have undergone certain mutations which help them gain the strength they need to fight monsters. However, this strength does not permit them to fight against humans. In fact, it's forbidden for Claymores to fight against humans, which can at times be a difficult situation for them, as humans are oftentimes just as monstrous as the monsters themselves. Next up, we have the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. This story at surface level seems very similar to Claymore, as both follow a mutated monster hunter in a world where humans at times are the bigger monsters. The setting is one in which war feels never ending. It's felt in the overall tone, even though our main characters aren't soldiers or nobles or anybody that actually has a huge influence in war. Geralt, our main character, is someone who tries often to stay neutral, but in action at times has worse consequences than if he were to actually choose a side. Ciri, who in many ways is a chosen one type character, does not have an arc anywhere close to that of most chosen ones. This is pretty common in Grimdark to take a typical theme or trope from the fantasy genre, but make it much darker, much grittier, and much more realistic. Generally speaking, there's quite a fondness for the Witcher story, but if the books themselves don't suit you, there's always the highly regarded video game series by CD Projekt Red that is definitely worth checking out. Fourth on the list is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This is a fairly new book, it's Asian inspired, and it pulls heavily from real atrocities in history. The author has clearly done extensive research, and thus the tone, themes, and setting all feel incredibly tangible. Keep in mind that this story can be extremely graphic, especially when it comes to rape and violence against children. If you prefer avoiding detailed descriptions of those things, this one might be better to skip. Lastly, we have the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. Being completely opinion-based, I think Abercrombie's The Blade itself, which is the first book in this trilogy, is the perfect example of Grimdark done right. It's dark, corrupt, and it explores gray morality and characters, but it does so in a way that feels both realistic and balanced. Things like torture, murder, and abuse are all explored, but they're explored in a way that never once feels like an attempt to shock the reader. That's it for the basics, everything you're going to want to know for getting into Grimdark Fantasy. If you'd like to provide your own recommendations or your own take on the genre, feel free to do that in the comment section down below. Thanks so much for watching, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later.